So thank you very much, Gilson, and wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm very tempted to focus on those lessons you learned from DARPA, especially for the management of those trying to explore more innovation. Maybe if you write on paper, write in books on those the lessons, maybe the Japanese CEO would love to read their books. But today, I would like to discuss with you about the such a DARPA's lessons or the current in the context of those uh, that the economic security concern is rising in everywhere. So once again, maybe the DARPA is now, I think we are shedding light on those, what kind of role of those DARPA would do, did, first of all, and then the what the DARPA would like to do in the future. So those kind of the things is the main topics I would like to talk about today with you. So first, Gilson, let me ask you about the how would you describe the current situation? And you mentioned about those GAFA or Google, those big tech companies are now dominating those U.S. Innovative arena. In other words, maybe you mentioned some importance of the hiring very talented people. But I heard those GAFA companies, the big tech companies, are now vacuuming all those monies and talent people from all over the world. And that private money is dominating on those innovative policies. In that context, what kind of DARPA is doing for those, and that the nature of the current movement? So that's the first question I would like to ask you, Jill.
Yes, of course. I'm very happy to discuss that. Acquiring the right talent is very important. But what we have learned is that having a few really, really talented people is much more important than the number of people that a laboratory has. It's kind of part of the whole innovative process. And of course, if you have a factory and you have 10 workers, they can produce half as much as the same factory with 20 workers. And so there's kind of a linear scaling with the manpower that you have in a factory. But when you have a creative organization with researchers, or actually any kind of creative organization, it matters much more how many of the best people do you have and how good are they versus the total number of people that you have. So what we have been very successful at is making an organization where we kind of make use of the most important parts of Japanese culture and also of Toyota specifically, and we attract people that love Japan and that love the culture of a company like Toyota. It's a company that cares a lot about social issues, not only money, and it's a company that cares about people a great deal and not only money. And I think that this is an incredible hidden strength that Japan has, because I don't know anywhere on earth where people care for each other as much as they do in Japan. And I have, of course, spent around 20% of my time over the last 7 years in Japan. And the contrast is just extreme. And I have managed to find some very, very talented people, some of the very best in the world, who now work for us. We have to pay them competitively with other companies like Google and Facebook, etc. But they choose to work for us because our mission is actually more attractive to them than the mission of the other IT companies. And the culture that we have and the country that we are associated with, Japan, is actually more attractive to them. So maybe most people don't want to work for us. That's okay. But some of the very best people do want to work for us. And the truth is, we don't need that many of them. It's not like a factory. It's much more like a creative art studio where you want the very best artist in the world, but you don't need that many of them.
So thank you very much. So another angle of the what kind of role, and sorry for that. Before that, the always you encouraged us about the such a good things we have in Japanese society. So we always tend to lose the sight of those. Maybe you always we like to talk about what kind of the challenge we are facing and what kind of measures we can take for that the challenge. But you always give me a chance to once again to look at what kind of strengths we have. So thank you very much for that. So after that, so I would like to ask another kind angle of that question of that. So I think this DARPA played a great role in the maybe nurturing so many seeds of those good innovation, and then all those findings lead to some commercial benefits in the U.S. society. And then that is a kind of thing we are seeing some good role model of the industrial policy. But I think there is a myth and the facts are now mixed in those maybe writings in job things. But what would you describe the DARPA's activities so far? What was the strengths or the what was a good part of those DARPA's activities? What was the challenges and of the DARPA faced, or in the future the DARPA will face? So could you describe the those DARPA's role in the angle of the those industrial policies?
Right. What I have found is that on reflection, DARPA was very strong in really understanding risk and really understanding the need for accepting a lot of failure. And part of the challenge in any project that is funded by the government is that if there is a failure, it becomes very political, and almost immediately the people who funded the work are attacked politically to say you wasted the taxpayer money. However, in DARPA's charter is especially to take on high risk, high reward projects. And so it's very important that every year the leaders of DARPA go and they brief the Congress on the good things that happened, and they also brief all of the bad things that happened, all of the failures that have happened, which is the majority. And by being very honest about all of the failures that happened, every single year that the briefing occurs, everyone in the government learns that this is the way that you get the best results. You have to place a lot of bets. You have to plant many seeds for the strongest tree to grow. And most of the seeds will actually not result in a good outcome. And so I think there is that's always a challenge that DARPA has, because usually politicians only want to hear good news, and they hate waste, especially waste of taxpayer money, because it's hugely unpopular. But the truth about research is that it works that way. And so I think that one of the lessons that's very important is this kind of constant education of the government and constant transparency with the public, so they understand that this is how the work is done. In terms of the failures that have happened, I think that there has been a failure to translate DARPA to other agencies within the US. Some of them have been moderately successful. I think in energy, as an example, the agency called ARPA-E has been pretty successful. However, there have been other smaller efforts to copy DARPA, and sometimes, actually often, they have failed. And I think it's very important to understand that you can't do it halfway. So I'll give you one example. The rotation of the personnel. I said in my talk that between 2 and 5 years is the limit of how long people can stay. The lesson that was given to me on my first day was every day I should wake up and I should look at my ID badge that is hanging around my neck, because on the bottom of the badge, it is written, what day am I finished? And at that day, I will be done with DARPA and I will move on to something else. And the lesson is to look at that badge every day and to say, I better move fast because I don't have much more time. And it causes everyone to move quickly. And so this has been, actually an incredibly inspiring thing. Some other people that have tried to copy DARPA have not done that part. And it turns out that it's a vital component in making it work. So I guess my advice would be to just be careful not to try to do half of it, but it's actually important to do the whole thing. It reminds me a lot, I learned later, of things like the Toyota production system, where many other companies have tried to copy it, but they copy just pieces of it, or they copy the superficial actions, but they don't understand it deeply.
So thank you very much once again. And then I would like to ask you a little bit deeper about what you have said. So I think it's a very difficult thing for, especially for us. Maybe that the criticism when we fail some project, the we would asked by the parliament to give them what kind of what is the situation, what was the reason of the failure. So very real so much. Maybe that is the more, I don't know, very difficult thing for us to stand up those kind of stand up against that criticism. So we tend to be more cautious about that. That is a nature, or that is maybe culture of Japanese, and I think it's a very bad thing about Japanese culture to be more risk taking. Maybe nature we would like to see. But so next question is like, how can you pick up the projects? You want to be of course, risk-taking, very innovative, the topics you would like to take up, but you don't want to make you don't want to invite such a criticism, such a foolish choice of the project. So how can you manage those round of the discussion? What kind of template you have about the how to choose that the projects of this?
Yes, it's an excellent question. At TRI, we call this opportunity discovery. How do you find the opportunities where a technology may make a big difference? Here's how it works. DARPA has a number of program managers, like the job that I had there before, and we don't have to get approval for each performer, for each scientist, for each company, for each school that does work for us. Rather, what we do is we pitch a program, a entire kind of effort that will have many different companies, many different performers working in competition with each other to solve the problem. But we have to convince the DARPA director and the deputy director, it's really only two people we have to convince, that this program is worth spending money. And maybe the program will be $50 million, maybe it will be $100 million, but we put together kind of a pitch, like we are venture capitalists and or a startup that is pitching to venture capitalists. And it's only a few slides, maybe 2 or 3 slides that really make up the essence of the pitch to say, I think that we should spend government money on this program. And ultimately, even though there's a lot of consultation, only 2 people make the decision, the director and the deputy director, and they say, okay, you can go ahead. And once that decision is made, every year we check in to report on the progress in the program and to say that it's either going well or not so well. And sometimes the program is stopped in the middle if it's not going so well. So what's important in this whole thing is, how do we know what to actually choose to do a project on? And what we do is we go and the best way is to explain it in Japanese. We do Genchi Genbutsu. We go around to other parts of the Defense Department and we learn what are the hardest problems that they have. What are the greatest opportunities that exist? And if we were to develop a technology, is all of the subcomponents, all of the sub-technologies that are necessary, are they almost ready to be effective, where a effort by DARPA could get them over the hump to suddenly it is possible? So I will give you an example. Let's take the example of UAVs. UAVs was something that DARPA worked on. It was very effective, but it required a number of technologies: the GPS system, the communications system, the kind of controls that are possible to put within an aircraft at the same time. And it turned out those were all just about ready. And some of them had even been demonstrated at a small scale for DARPA to put in a single investment to get it over the hump. And suddenly it became an incredibly powerful force. GPS worked exactly the same way. The internet, very much the same way. So it's when that technology is almost ready to go that DARPA is the most effective. The people who are trusted to judge that initially is just the individual program managers. It's a bottom-up process, and then they pitch it to the director, and the director says yes or no. And then if the director and the deputy director say yes, then it goes ahead and it becomes a program. And then we start putting out the solicitations to get the performers who want to work on the project from the whole country, both schools and industry. And it's just an incredibly effective way because it puts a lot of trust in individuals. Now, does it always work? The answer is no. But part of accepting high risk, high reward is that you accept that sometimes entire projects are bad. And sometimes the program manager, after 1 year, gives a report on how things are going. And if they are honest, they say, you know what? I pitched this, I thought it was a good idea, but actually it's not. The technology is too soon, or maybe the program is too easy, but we made a mistake. This one should be stopped, and we should take the money and use it for something else. And that actually happens. And so, again, it's this whole culture of accepting that failure, it's not that you want things to fail, but you accept that failure is necessary for success. And that just changes the culture of the whole thing. I think that's very important.
Thank you. And that way of choosing the projects is, I understand you would like to choose maybe projects that is really, really high risk but high reward areas. But is that or the recognition that you are competing with the like a competitor of China or Chinese companies, those recognition does have any impact on the you choose that projects without thinking? No, maybe if you think about the high risk, high reward thing, maybe who you are competing with doesn't matter. But in reality, those considerations can come into play of those choice of those projects.
No, it is extremely important. So what is most important for defense in the US, and I think the same kind of thinking goes into the commercial space as the defense space. Of course, you look at the competition that is around the world. You see who are the adversaries that we have. And you try to say, how can we leapfrog the capability that the adversary has? And so, as an example, the GPS system is wonderful, but very quickly, many countries developed jammers that could stop it from operating. So there was an effort that DARPA had to figure out, can we make systems that will work in GPS-denied environments, in a place where the GPS system is blocked? Can you still do navigation? And the answer is yes. You do it with maps and with recognition and AI and all kinds of things like that. But that was done specifically in response to this kind of technological challenge from an adversary nation. So of course, this goes into it all of the time. And the question is, who is coming up with the ideas of what to do to solve the problem? And the answer is the program managers. And most of them are actually young. And so another part of this thing, which I know is somewhat different than happens in many companies in Japan, is that DARPA realized that most new ideas, most really innovative ideas, come from young people. However, young people don't have very good judgment of what idea is a good idea and what idea is probably bad. And so the role of the more senior people, of the people with more experience, is not to do the creative part of coming up with the possible idea, but it's rather to judge the idea, to say, is it a good idea or a bad one? And that's where the director and the deputy director, who have much more experience, say yes or no, as each one of the young program managers comes up and says, I want to start a program to do this. And sometimes the director will say, that's wonderful. I wish I had thought of that, but I'm too old, so I don't think of new things. Or maybe they will say, well, that sounds very clever. However, you forgot that somebody else tried that 5 years ago and it didn't work. So no, we're not going to do that. And so it's this kind of beautiful duality of roles between typically younger people and typically older people, less experience and more, each one taking on this role of who generates the ideas and then who judges the ideas, and each one doing what they are best at.
Okay, thank you very much. So then next maybe angle of those all those innovative activities in the U.S. Now that I understand the U.S. Government is starting to those industrial policy, especially take the example of the semiconductor. Maybe unlike the conventional wisdom or conventional thinking of the U.S. government, is the role to play in that area is maybe leave those activities to the hands of the private companies mainly. But nowadays, U.S. government is now undertaking on those more commercial, in conventional thinking, stepping into that the more commercial area to subsidize some activities of the private semiconductor companies, R&D, even to the upscaling of those facilities. So in general, what would you think? Is that the maybe the drastic change of the course of the way of thinking of innovative policy, rather than the new phase of the industrial policy? What would you think? Or what would you feel in this current trend of the U.S. government?
So it's a great question. I think it has a lot to do with what the international environment is like. Actually, if we look back to the time when Japan was challenging the U.S. in the semiconductor industry, there actually was a strong government policy action by the U.S. at the time. It was called Semitech. And it basically was a government-funded collaboration between semiconductor companies to develop pre-competitive technology for the production of integrated circuits at finer and finer scale. And this was really because the US felt incredibly threatened and challenged at the time in the past by Japan. I think the same thing is happening now again. So it's not that this is completely new, but this is kind of a cyclic thing that happens again and again. And now the concern is mostly about China. And I think that as a result of that, there's a desire to try to diversify and to have onshoring of some of these semiconductor facilities to be state of the art, both within the US, and I think that Japan is doing it as well. And I think it's very important because left to itself, the industry will not evolve in this direction. Here's what I think is the key to understanding this. If you have pure capitalism, pure economics, without any government intervention, what will happen is the system will keep trying to become more efficient. The costs will continue to be reduced. The waste will continue to be reduced because that's what competition does. The manufacturing will move in the globe to the place where it is the least expensive to make things, because the prices will drop and competition will naturally drive it towards there. The trouble with that is that is very brittle. It is not robust. And it can actually end up creating a over-optimized solution that is actually very fragile. And I think that's what has been happening in the semiconductor field. We've had this kind of concentration of manufacturing and manufacturing expertise in just a very few parts of the world. This happened even more recently with personal protective equipment like masks and gowns and things like that for COVID-19. We had tremendous offshoring of this manufacturing capability, mostly to China. And there's nothing wrong with China, but when the pandemic hit, we became incredibly vulnerable because there was not distributed manufacturing of personal protective equipment against COVID-19 distributed around the world. The reason it happened was because of the drive for efficiency. And so I think it's important for everyone in the world, and governments in particular, to recognize that there's always a trade-off between efficiency and robustness. And you don't want things to become too fragile. You need some robustness also. And that's where governments can step in to make sure that we have a diversity of options, a diversity around the globe, and a distribution of economic capabilities throughout the world. So I think it's very important. And I know that actually DARPA played a role in Semitech in the past as well. And so I believe very strongly that this is important.
Okay, thank you very much. So if I may, rather going back to the first, your comment about the importance of the procuring or getting the most talented people in those project making, or rather maybe in a more broader sense, that such a talented people decides of those with the success of all those innovative policies. In that sense, maybe in the current geopolitical landscape, maybe it is getting increasingly difficult for you to get the talented people from China. And in China, so Chinese scientists also were strengthening the Silicon Valley as a whole.
Right.
Is there any change in your daily life of those changing this geopolitical situation, having an impact on those finding out or getting those talented people from China? Or is there any new way of getting those talented people from other else? So what would you say to that?
It's a really good point. The strength of Silicon Valley, the reason that Silicon Valley is so successful, is because of the U.S. immigration policy, except for a few years during the Trump years. In general, U.S. Immigration policy was extremely open to highly talented people. And there's even a special kind of visa that we have for highly talented people in order to make sure that the door is open for them to come here. Often they come here for study in the universities, and then they stay afterwards. So that's also a method that works very, very well. The situation with China is a little bit bad, but it's not terrible. So actually, we still have pretty much an open door to students coming from China and some very talented people coming as well. And so I think in the US, the situation presently is actually pretty good. However, I do believe that it's very important for every country to realize what the lesson of Silicon Valley is. And here it is. The talent of people, how smart people are, is roughly evenly distributed everywhere in the world. So if we just assume that the density of smart people, both men and women, is roughly the same everywhere in the world, the question is, can we collect them? Can we skim the very best people, like cream on top of coffee? Can we skim them and concentrate them in one place. And how do we get that to occur? You can't force people to move. However, you can make an environment that's incredibly attractive, that makes them want to come and live there and to work there. And it's not really about money. It's about opportunity. It's about freedom of thought. It's about the ability to work with other smart people who are there and to experience the diversity of many people from different parts of the world that have many different points of view. And for there to be this kind of diversity, not only in geographic background, but in gender and all kinds of other things. And that's actually what makes Silicon Valley so strong. And so my advice is that if Japan can replicate that, can create areas where, and I know that you are starting to do this, where people from all over the world who are the very, very best are welcome. And as I said before, Japan has so many wonderful things to offer. When we send some of our people from the US to go work for Toyota in Japan for a little while, after 2 or 3 years, they don't want to come back. They love things in Japan. So I think that maybe look in the mirror a little bit and smile and say, we have something to offer here, and create a beautiful place for people all over the world who are at the top of their field to come and work. I think that can be very effective.
Thank you, thank you. Always, you were giving me we have to smile. We have to look at the mirror and smile. That's the most important message I always receive from you. So, maybe last question, because you have so many variety of the experiences. So, let me ask you about the what kind of startup is playing in the role of those great idea which may be embedded in the DARPA or it may be embedded in colleges to the reality or to a business world, and then the such a bridging of those maybe ballets from those just simple idea to more commercialized idea is such a startup is playing a very great role in your country, and Silicon Valley is a source of that. So you're now in those Silicon Valley, and I understand those Silicon Valleys or the startups as a whole is getting more importance of those current maybe nature of the businesses, especially in those exponential growth is now getting more higher importance in those. So from your angle, that the those startups power is getting bigger, and then the overwhelming of those governments, even though the government is embarking on those industrial policy, how would you foresee of those startups power
Yeah.
in the future?
It is really a good point. Silicon Valley and other areas of the US that have a lot of startups are wonderful places. But again, most of the startups will fail. And it's the same mindset, but instead of on a project basis, it's actually on a company basis as well. The greatest example that I can think of right now is OpenAI, which has been in the news tremendously, and a huge amount of drama with regard to the CEO. First he's fired, then he's brought back, all kinds of things. Without worrying about the drama of that, this is the kind of sort of very hot incubator that these startups flourish in. And the people in Silicon Valley that go to work for the startups, they typically have worked at several startups before, and each one that fails is like a badge of honor. I tried this startup and it failed, so I have a badge. I tried this one and it failed, another badge, another one. And then finally, I was at one that was successful and either was bought by another company or maybe became public in an IPO or something like that. And this kind of, try and try again and fail each time and then finally succeed is the normal culture here. Everybody here kind of has stories that are like that. And I think that this is very important to realize that if the government can fund startups, it needs to accept that many of them are going to fail. And it needs to not give any one of them too much money at the beginning. We have a venture fund for Toyota, called Toyota Ventures that is especially set up in Silicon Valley to fund early stage startups, not only in the US, but everywhere in the world. And we invest in, dozens of different companies, and not all of them succeed, but we have a very staged way of giving money to them. At the beginning, we give them a little bit, and then if they're successful, we give them a little more. And it's a whole system, and I'd be glad to speak more about it at any time that you would like, for how to have kind of an optimal way to sort of do the gardening to make sure that you end up with a few really, really strong trees. And so I think it's very important for METI and for any parts of the government in Japan, don't only study Google and Facebook and Apple, Amazon, etc. Those companies are already mature, okay? They are big. It's much more important to study the venture capital startups, the different funds that we have here. And if you want to, I'm sure that the head of Toyota Ventures would be glad to speak to you about the lessons that he's learned, because funding efforts from the government is very similar, if you do it well, to being a venture capitalist. And actually, the director of DARPA, when I was there, she actually was a venture capitalist before she became the director of DARPA. And she used a lot of that experience in funding projects in the same kind of mindset. So I would very much love to talk to you more about that whenever you'd like, and also bring our head of Toyota Ventures to speak with you whenever you'd like.
Yeah, I would love to, maybe we would love to hear or listen to what you will say about the such a startup culture and what you found in the Silicon Valley from the Toyota's point of view. But because of time restraint, I have to finish up all those maybe dialogue. But thank you very much for your wonderful answers and maybe insights from against the my obscure, more generic questions. But maybe we would like to have another chance to talk with you about those startup things or more in general innovative policies. Thank you very much today.
It was my great pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Thank you very much for fruitful discussion, Dr. Pratt and Mr. Hirai-san. And we will now move on to the question and answer session. Time is limited, so I will give Dr. Pratt-san just one question. And I would like to ask you on the relation between economic security policy by government and private innovation policy. How do we make or promote win-win relation between economic security policy by government and innovation policy of private companies? If we have some, what's the most important point to create the constructive relation?
Hi. I think the most important thing is to realize what the other side cannot do. So when we were considering starting a program at DARPA, one of the questions that I had to answer as a program manager was why DARPA? Why should we invest our own money in doing this? And I think the government should always ask itself this question: why do we have to put in money? And it's very kind of easy to do the exercise. First, what if we don't put in money? What will likely happen if the private industry does it by itself? Well, maybe they will develop it, or maybe they won't. I will give you an example. There are many tropical diseases that private industry in the medical field does not find to be profitable, because those countries are typically the poorest in the world, and there is really not much profit to be made and not many customers with resources to pay for the cure. However, for the Department of Defense, it's very important, because we have to operate in all parts of the world, including some parts of the world where these are very poor countries, where there are tropical diseases. So this is a place where the answer is clear. The government has to do it because private industry will not do it. In the same way, I think it's important for private industry to also ask the question, why should we work on something? Is the government going to do it in any case? And I think it's much better when private industry is honest with themselves, and instead of trying to make their life easier by taking advantage of government funding, they look for a way to be complementary. Let the private industry work on things that only they can do, and let the government fund things that the private industry is not going to do. I think that kind of clear thinking, that sort of symbiotic role between the two of them is very important. Of course, there are some projects where you need everyone to cooperate. And I think that's kind of the third class, which is where the government can be a catalyst, can sort of help to amplify the effort from private industry. And I think that's important also.
Thank you for your clear answer. Now it's time to close the webinar. I would like to thank Dr. Pratt and Mr. Hirai for their excellent presentation and comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Arigatou gozaimasu.
ありがとうございます。